when I'm present, there's a greater chance for compassion to arise and for my words and actions to reflect compassion as my highest value for self and others. And that doesn't just change me. That changes everyone who comes in contact with me. And that changes the world. And this is why we practice. We don't practice to get handstand lotus in the center of the room. You know what happened when I got handstand lotus in the center of the room? Nothing. I still had to go home and wash the dishes. So it's this shift, this internal shift of perspective that allows me or anyone over time to see the bigger picture. And that's why we practice.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to the show. And today we're continuing our conversation with Judith Hanson Lasater. We're going to talk about yoga philosophy, and in particular, what are the 8 limbs of yoga? What are the 8 limbs of yoga really about? And she unpacks the big lessons from yogic philosophy that, I don't know, it's kind of like the headline of the Yoga Sutras. And it even helped me. I've been teaching the Yoga Sutras in my teacher trainings, and it even helped me understand the Yoga Sutras in a new way, just because her knowledge is so deep. We're going to cover the true meaning of ahimsa, which is nonviolence, and santosha, which is contentment. Judith is going to teach us how to embrace sadness and how the teachings of yoga and the sutras are really about becoming an integrated person. And she's going to explain what that means. If you don't know who Judith Hanson Lasater is, she holds a Ph.D. in East-West psychology and a B.S. in physical therapy. She's taught yoga since 1971, and she's the founder of the Iyengar Yoga Institute in San Francisco, as well as Yoga Journal magazine. She just has an incredible background. She's been teaching for so many years, and I was so honored to have her on the show. She was named the most influential yoga teacher in the USA recently by Yoga Journal magazine as well, and she's the author of 10 books on yoga, the latest of which is called Restore and Rebalance, the Yoga of Deep Relaxation. Before we dive into the 8 limbs of yoga with Judith, I just want to remind you of how you can support the show. Making a purchase on SavannahSpirit.com, anything your heart desires. They have the most amazing jewelry, clothing, stones, and crystals designed to support your yoga practice. You can use that coupon code TAKE25 for $25 off anything that you want. And then your ratings and reviews here on iTunes, I know it sounds silly, and I know I say it every week, but it really makes a difference. And to anyone who leaves a rating or review on iTunes right now, if you just screenshot that rating or review once you leave it and email it to my team, info@brettlarkin.com, we'll respond as a thank you with a beautiful PDF with all my favorite journaling prompts and affirmations that I'm using in my own life and have been really transformational for me. So I'd love to share those with you in exchange for you leaving a rating or review, just to say thank you and to get even more connected with one another. All right, let's dive into today's conversation with Judith. Savannah family, welcome back. We're talking to Judith Hanson Lasater again today. I'm so thrilled because she has so much incredible knowledge to share with us. And we left off on the last episode, Judith, you were saying how yoga is really an internal experience. We were talking about how as yoga teachers and practitioners, we need to leave more space for silence, whether it's in shavasana or just in our asana practice in general. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about the philosophy of yoga and what you mean when you say it's an internal practice, even if we go to group classes.
Well, thank you so much for having me again. Group classes are a fairly new phenomena in the history of yoga. It was generally taught to people living more in an ashram situation who would have talks with their guru. He'd give talks to all of them, and they'd have a one-on-one relationship. So, but yoga is a practice that you do alone, really, on your mat, hopefully at home mostly, and classes to spice it up. But it doesn't follow that it has to be lonely. And I think that's what we like about group classes, because many of us live far from friends and family. And even though we're on our own mat, having our own experience, there are people around us we share that with. So the philosophy of yoga is based on a view of reality that let me compare it to Western philosophy and psychology a bit. What we say in Western psychology, we say mind over matter. We draw a line between the function of the mind, the function we call mind, and everything else. And this split is still very apparent in medicine and in the world and in our language. We're much more aware of the connection of the body, mind, and emotions. But we still have this split, mind over matter. But in yoga philosophy, mind is matter. The line is drawn a different place, that there is a self, a consciousness that is separate from but connected to matter. And what yoga philosophy teaches us, it's called Samkhya, Samkhya. Samkhya philosophy is what yoga is based on, and sometimes you even see it written Samkhya-yoga, is that as long as we identify with things that change, and we all know everything changes, and not with that which is eternal, we will suffer. So if we pick up Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, that is a roadmap for happiness. And it tells you basically how to be happy and not to suffer. And it starts with the 8, there's a lot of deep talk about stages of samadhi, but in a practical way, it lists the 8 limbs of yoga. And what I like to think is these 8 limbs, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, that these 8 limbs are a description of what an integrated person does. They're not a proscription of what we should do. In other words, you look at the yamas and the niyamas, which many people call the 10 commandments of yoga. So the first one is ahimsa, non-harming. And that's the basis. I mean, if you want to practice yoga, first stop harming yourself and others. Now, most of us are not going around violently acting out, but we are having violent thoughts and judgments about ourselves. And if you don't think you have violent thoughts, sit next to someone who's smoking or listen to someone who has completely different political views than you have. And you'll notice that you'll be having angry, violent thoughts. So what yoga says is, if you practice yoga, you start with the yamas, niyamas. Asana is the third step. But what these yamas and niyamas are telling us is an integrated person, someone who is deeply present and aware, is going to choose not to steal and not to harm. Not because, as I was trained when I was growing up, don't steal because you're a bad person if you steal. What the sutras say is don't steal, because if you steal, you're going to suffer, and it's not going to ultimately get you what you want. It's just going to create more suffering. So when I was growing up and going to church, we talked a lot about sin. And so I like to say that there's only one sin, quote unquote, in the wide practice of yoga as a way of being and living. And that's the belief in separation. So if I believe that I am separate from you, I can harm you. If I understand that on the most deep level, and even physicists will tell you this, we're all just swimming in this sea of electrons. There really isn't this separation. But if I believe on every level that there is no separation, ultimately, I can't harm. I can't harm the earth. I can't harm myself. I mean, there's even a disease called schizophrenia, which is like being separated from yourself. And the word schizophrenia actually means split diaphragm. It's like you're split off from yourself. So the practices of yoga all have the idea that they are to turn us into being self-reflective, to create a constant habit of self-reflection. So let me just give you one more idea. What I think the practices of yoga, the study of the yamas and niyamas, and the practice of asana and pranayama and pratyahara through shavasana, for example, and then meditation, is creating this habit of self-reflection and which helps me live in the present more and not be pulled away by a body that is hurting or emotions that are stirred up. And when I am present, That's not the end of spiritual practice. That's the beginning of it. So when I'm present, then I have the most important thing, which is what I call the pause. So if I'm present right now, this moment as we're talking, and I create this habit of self-reflection and presence, I have this pause so that I can choose in any moment my words and my actions. When I'm present, there's a greater chance for compassion to arise and for my words and actions to reflect compassion as my highest value for self and others. And that doesn't just change me. That changes everyone who comes in contact with me. And that changes the world. And this is why we practice. We don't practice to get handstand lotus in the center of the room. You know what happened when I got handstand lotus in the center of the room? Nothing. I still had to go home and wash the dishes. So it's this shift, this internal shift of perspective that allows me or anyone over time to see the bigger picture. And that's why we practice.
Just soaking in everything you've shared. I think something I know when I teach a lot of the sutras, like that people really struggle with is this idea, like you talked about it as being a roadmap to happiness, but would you agree that it's almost like he's really more giving us like a roadmap towards just like contentment? Because it's like not being attached to, you're not always going to be happy, like ecstatic, right? Because that's just the same side of the coin or the other side of the coin as being kind of, upset. So it's like this equanimity of mind where I don't think I'm doing a good job describing it, but it's like this peace, this deep sense of peace, as opposed to being extremely happy or, sad.
Well, this is what I think, that santosha or contentment is really big. And can you be content with your lack of contentment? Can you be content with the fact that you're grumpy and you don't know why? Can you be content with being richly, deeply joyful in the moment? I don't want my practice of yoga to alter my ability to feel joy or sadness, because I think sadness is a life-affirming emotion, and only people who are deeply alive can feel sad. Sadness is rich. I mean, depressed people shut down sadness. Depression is not an emotion, it's a strategy. So sadness is so sweet, because my favorite word in English is bittersweet, because I think that reflects life more than any other word. And if I cut off my ability to feel sad, I'm going to cut off my ability to feel joyful. And non-attachment and contentment is the willingness to feel what is.
Yeah, I think students get hung up a lot.
Robust and big contentment.
Right. Like that word non-attachment, I think, is hard for people sometimes, right? Because
they're like, hard. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
I mean, but what's our choice? What's the choice? The way I look at it, this is what I say to my students all the time. There's two kinds of pain in the world. The kind you get from doing yoga and the kind you get from not doing it. And by that, I mean, you're going to have difficulty if you look at your attachment and your fear and your anger and you deal with living this life. Your house burns down, someone steals your car, people you love die. I mean, life is really sad. There's a lot of sadness in life. And if we're going to cut off the ability to feel that sadness, we're cutting off a lot of life. It's also very joyful. There's babies and yoga and Mozart and chocolate and love and kisses and flowers and dancing and sunsets. And I mean, life is this mysterious process of sadness and joy and happiness. And to me, the integrated person feels both of them more, not less. That the integrated person does not turn away from sadness, does not push it away. And the integrated person is willing to feel deep happiness. I mean, I had last year, I remember one time I was driving somewhere and I loved Mozart's music. And I was listening to this piano concerto on the radio when I was driving. And I got this feeling that my vertebral column, my backbone, was the keyboard on the piano. And the musician that I was hearing was playing my spine, and the music was going up and down my spine. And I had to pull over and cry because it was so beautiful. And I don't want to lose the ability to feel life richly and deeply, to be present with it, to be a larger container within which to hold all the aspects of my being. This is what integration is. You invite all the feelings that arise into the tent of your being. My grandmother used to have a pillow that said, "You don't have anything nice to say about somebody, come sit by me." It was true too. And so what we tend to do is we think, oh, love and light, love and light. Yes, that's part of light. And we do feel more loving, often more open and happy when we practice yoga, but there's not to the point where we push away the parts of ourselves we don't also like. The integrated person feels them too, invites them to anger and darkness. Not that we act on them, but that which we repress runs our life. And so to me, the practice of yoga is about becoming a bigger container within which to hold all that I am with compassion. So I have to tell you a funny story. So you know how people always say love and light in the yoga world?
Yes.
I was teaching a workshop to some of my senior students, and we were talking about this whole idea of integration. And they got so excited about it that when they asked me to sign their books, they said, "Would you sign In Darkness and Fear? Namaste, Judith." And so I said, it was, because we were laughing about it. So I put quotes around it. In darkness and fear, now just to remind them not to avoid the dark part. But I just got so tickled at thinking, because, books always end up like often in used bookstores and stuff. That's when your books are really out there. It's really a great honor for an author when you go into a used bookstore and there's one of your books. But I just thought, wouldn't it be funny if somebody goes in there and there's this yoga book and they open it up and it's signed to Tom, In Darkness and Fear, Namaste, Judith. They're going to go, I'm not going to read this book. That woman's crazy.
That's so funny. I love what you're sharing about framing the sutras as helping us be the most integrated self that we can be, so we can experience a range of emotions and still kind of have our center. I love what you said about being a really big container for all that life has to offer. I'm curious, before we let you go, as someone who I know teaches and trains 1,000 teachers a year and just has such a large following, what I don't want to say mistakes, but what kind of common misunderstandings do you often see people teaching or learning about the sutras and about yogic philosophy, like that the yamas and niyamas are commandments, for example, or like do's and don'ts, or just like things like that, or certain translations or perspectives on things that you've seen over and over again, or just like kind of myths that you want to bust while we have you?
I have two. One is, I heard this once from a Buddhist teacher who's a good friend of mine. We used to teach week-long retreats together. And she said, and I believe this is true, the biggest mistake people make in spiritual practice is the belief they have to be different. So I think a big mistake we make in yoga is we use the asana to flagellate ourselves. I'm not saying we don't challenge ourselves, but discipline is not about force. It's about consistency. We're on the mat every day. It's raining, we're on the mat. We're happy, we're on the mat. We're grumpy, we're on the mat. We're in our period, we're on the mat. It's consistency. And so I think not to think that there's something inherently wrong with you that you have to fix with yoga. That you can definitely learn things, you can get stronger and more flexible and more self-reflective, but you're inherently good. And in fact, I think the job of a yoga teacher, the number one job of a yoga teacher, is to mirror back the inherent goodness and inner wisdom of each of their students. And you have to find that in yourself first. That doesn't mean that I don't say things that are hurtful, but most of the things that I do that are harmful are turned inward and judging me. I think that's really common. So there's that. And then the second thing is, I think our yoga is too small. We think of it as something we do and not something we are. Because what are they going to put on your tombstone? We miss her so much, her hamstrings were so loose. I mean, yoga is a practice that you do alone, but that has life and power because you share what you've learned on your mat with the world. You become the yoga. That's what an integrated person is. They no longer do yoga. They might do asana, meditation, pranayama, but they are the yoga. And that's something that I think we need to teach people, that don't just think of it, if you can't do headstand, you're not a yogi. Because I have to tell you, as you get older, poses leave you. And if there's not something deeper there, there's going to be a time when you can't do 108 dropping backs or 108 sun salutations or extreme poses, or you'll have an injury, or you'll be pregnant, or so we have to understand that it's a big, huge practice that affects every aspect of our being and all our relationships. It's a huge thing. And it's not just, bakasana on your mat.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Is there any just parting words or wisdom that you want to share with us? I feel like you've given us so much. I just want to make sure I give you the opportunity before we close out. I've really loved everything you shared.
Do something every day that changes your perspective and reminds you of how lucky you are to have this practice in your life.
Thank you, Judith.
Thank you. Namaste. Maybe live like the lotus at home in the muddy water.
Will you tell people before we end for today just how they can find you and connect with you? Maybe they want to buy your books or, go on some of your trainings or retreats. What do you have coming up and how can they get all that info?
Judith.yoga.
Judith.yoga. Okay, perfect. So no .com. It's just Judith.yoga.
There's a .yoga now.
That's too cool. I can't believe that they have a .yoga. All right. As always, Savannah listeners, I'll put that link in the show notes so you can connect and see Judith's amazing offerings. Let me know what you thought of today's episode. Your ratings and reviews here on iTunes really do make a difference. They help get the show in front of more people looking to transform their life through yoga and meditation. So if you haven't taken a moment to leave a review, please do that today. And if you're not sure how to do it because iPhones are confusing and iTunes is confusing, you can go to savannahspirit.com/review and we have step-by-step instructions for you. I'm sending you so much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.